CBSE Board, Class 11, History, Chapter 3, Part 23, Audio by Renee Matthew. The Aztecs had two styles of educational institution, a group to which the rich people went and a group to which the ordinary people resorted to. So children of the nobility we saw in the previous audio attended the Kalmakak, and they were trained obviously to become military and religious leaders. But what about the remaining people? They went to a place known as Tepokekli. This is where we stopped the previous audio, and we need to see the subjects that the students chose or they were trained in. So you should make a note of one particular point, that the children of the nobility were trained in Kalmakak, and they were trained to become military and religious leaders, and that too, that was a specific topic that they chose. But when it came to the ordinary people, Tepokekli, they learned history, myth, religion and ceremonial songs in a different institution known as Tepokekli. Boys obviously received military training as well as training in agriculture and the trades, because when they grow up, definitely they have to be a part of trade, military training and agriculture. And girls were trained in domestic skills. So what they're going to become in the future was of a great importance, and what kind of occupation that they're going to choose, that was also very important. And based on that only they gave the training to the children. So that is why boys were trained in one particular skill and girls were trained in another skill. Okay. So now the pictures of both the groups are given there, like how they got trained. What is the difference that you can see on the screen? We can see that the higher nobility, they had only very few members in the educational institution, that is Kalmakak, but the other one had more number of students. So maybe the access to education was different in both the institutions. Okay. So in the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire was showing signs of strain. It was showing a great strain. Okay. It was usually because of the discontent among the conquered people. People were not having any identity, and they were looking for more opportunities to break free from the central control. They did not want to be a part of the control, and they were really discontented with what was happening socially, economically, politically, in different ways. So we saw the way Aztecs were ruling. Now we need to look at how the Mayas were actually ruling, or what was the significance of the groups named Mayas. Look at the way they dress, or look at the skills that they got trained in. Of course, there is a slight difference in their costume, in the way they behaved and all that. Okay, so Mayas, very important part. This particular section which deals with Mayas, Incas and Aztecs are very important. Now Mayan culture it hails from Mexico, and it developed between the 11th and 14th century. But in the 16th century, they had less political power than the Aztecs. So we can understand that the Aztecs were more powerful than the Mayas, and they had more dominance over the others. So corn cultivation was central to their culture, and many religious ceremonies centered on harvesting, on farming and everything, because their basic occupation was agriculture, which comprised of planting, growing, harvesting. So everything centered around corn cultivation. Whatever they did centered around corn cultivation. Okay. So because of efficient agricultural production, because of only that method that they used, there was surplus production. And that helped the ruling classes, priests, chiefs, all of them to invest in architecture and in the development of astronomy and mathematics. So we can understand that the basis for their economy was trade and agriculture. And because of that, only the ruling classes, the priests, the chiefs and everybody was able to get something and to invest in other spheres of trade, in other spheres of interest, for example, agriculture, astronomy, mathematics. So it's only because of the surplus amount that they got from agriculture. Mayas had something very peculiar to them. It was a pictographic form of writing, and that is only partially deciphered. People were not able to completely decode the meaning of these pictographic forms of writing. Even the archaeologists are studying it deeply, and they are only in the process of decoding what was represented through these pictographic forms of writing. And as you can see on the screen, these are the different pictographic forms of writing which were developed by the Mayas. Okay, it looks very picturesque and very difficult to understand, but very skillfully depicted. Okay, maybe it can be a story, and look at the representations there, the changes in the facial expressions or whatever they're trying to communicate. It is a form of communication. Now next is the Incas of Peru. So you should remember that pictographic form of writing was very peculiar only to the Mayas. Now the Incas of Peru, they were the indigenous civilization which was really particular in South America, and they were a part of the Quichuas or Incas in Peru. The other name for them is Quichuas. In the 12th century, that is the first Inca, Manco Capac, established his capital at Cusco. The first Inca, the first person to become Inca, he established his capital at Cusco. Look at their tradition, look at the way they dress. There is a lot of difference in the way they dress and carry themselves. So expansion began in the under 9th Inca. The first Inca was Manco Capac, but from the 9th Inca only the expansion took place. It stretched 3,000 miles from Ecuador to China. This was the expansion. You have to remember the stretch of land of the Incas along which they flourished, Ecuador to Chile. Now these are the pictures that I have given. Okay, it is Ecuador to Chile. Okay, that is the correct term. The empire was highly centralized because the king was representing the highest source of authority. The king was the apex of authority. He was at the apex, and newly conquered tribes were absorbed effectively. Okay, they started conquering, and newly conquered tribes were also absorbed like a sponge, and every subject they had to learn. They were required to speak Quichua, the language of the court. If they conquered a new tribe, they will convert them and they will make them adept and adapt to the dressing, the culture of the Incas. So they were a bit more powerful, and they had to learn this new language known as the Quichua. Okay. So each tribe was ruled independently by a council of elders. There was a council of elders, and this tribe was ruled independently. But the tribe owed its allegiance to the ruler. The tribe was particularly alleged, or you can say very much kind of indebted to the ruler. At the same time, local rulers were rewarded for their military cooperation. Suppose they showed their strength in military cooperation, they were actually rewarded. So like the Aztec Empire, the Inca Empire resembled a confederacy with the Incas in control. So they had a confederacy unlike all the others. If you look at all the other tribes, the confederacy and everything was different, but Incas established, and it almost was similar to the confederacy kind of idea that we have today. There is no precise figure of the population. We don't have any much documents which shows the population, but of course it included over 1 million people. We have so many people which comprise the population of Incas. Look at this particular place shown on the screen. And you should remember that the Aztecs and Incas were very good in building. They were magnificent builders. With less technology, with less process or development, these people, they were skilled in building roads and all that. So we saw that the stretch from Ecuador to Chile was completely occupied by the Incas, and they started building roads through the mountains from Ecuador to Chile. Their forts were built of stone slabs, so it was perfectly cut. They did not require mortar. Okay, all the slabs and stones that they used were skillfully cut. If they have to build these kind of roads, it had to be really very skillful. So they cut the stones, and it did not require much mortar, but they were able to skillfully do it. That is the meaning of this. So that was a kind of mastery that they had over architecture. They used labor-intensive technology. What do you mean by that? People had to work, okay, to carve and move stones from nearby rock falls. It is not that they gave everything readily available. The stones and everything was not readily available to them. They had to carve the stones and move the stones from the nearby location and then make use of it. Masons started shaping the blocks. Did you see here the mountainous terrainous region over here? They had to take stones from here, these particular places. So they were required to make use of the surroundings and carve the stones. And masons were there who shaped the blocks, and they used effective way of flaking the tools. Flaking the tools, you know, you make the kind of grinding, the polishing, you taper it towards the end like this. It will be rugged like this, and they will kind of shape it to make it more easier for them to work with, because if it is rough and if it is rounded, they will not be able to work. So they cut out all these tools from stones, and then they started working on it, grinding it, polishing it, and all that. And the stones were not very easy to carry. It weighed more than 100 metric tons. They did not, of course, have any wheeled vehicles to transport these, so it was very difficult to transport and then engage in this building work. But you should remember that labor was organized by the Aztecs. It was tightly managed. They managed it. They made sure that people worked. They did not want to take a chance in anything. Look at this particular place. The basis of the Inca civilization was agriculture. They were based in agriculture. And all the places that you see here was infertile. It was not very fertile with very bad soil conditions. So what they did, they terraced hillsides and developed systems of drainage and irrigation. So those places which was not suitable for irrigation, they made it suitable. They made it good. They made it terraced, and they developed drainage and irrigation systems on that. So it was pointed out in the recent years that in 1500, cultivation in a place known as Andean Highlands was much greater than what it is today. Earlier, the cultivation was high because people were laborious and they had a very good management system. Now that is not the case. The Incas, what did they grow? Just like the Mayas, they also grew corn, potatoes, but they grew corn, but more than that potatoes, they reared llamas for food and labor. So this was the kind of lifestyle that they had. Growing corn, potatoes, rearing llamas for food and labor. So look at this picture. This place was made like this because of the labor of these people, because of the labor of the Inca civilization. And that is how it looked. Okay, earlier it was not like that. So those conditions which were not favorable was made favorable by the skill tactics of the Incas. Their weaving and pottery were of very high quality. And of course, just like the others, they did not develop any system of writing. It is a kind of contradictory feature to the Mayas. They did not have any system of writing. There was a kind of accounting system which they followed, and the name of the accounting system is the Quipu, or codes, upon which knots were made to indicate specific mathematical units. Okay, accounting system where they used to knot. Look at this. This is how the Quipu looked, and they used to take care of it. Like this is the Quipu where you have chords, all these knots are there, and they will knot it up so that it is a barometer, or it is a kind of measurement system where they used to indicate the specific mathematical unit. Suppose they have 3 knots, they will know what it indicated. So this is Quipu. This is a picture of Quipu. Can you see that particular thing? It looks very similar to a very small pyramid, right, that you see in Egypt. Let's see what it is. Incas wove a sort of code into these threads. So that they're talking about Quipu. There was a kind of code that they decoded or used to read the mathematical units. The organization of the Inca Empire with its pyramid-like structure, they were also fascinated by this pyramid-like structure, meant that if the Inca chief was captured, the chain of command could quickly come apart. Suppose the Inca chief was captured, they could not even think of going or progressing or going further, because when the Inca chief is captured, they feel that everything just falls apart. So this is what happened when the Spaniards decided to invade their country. So when the Spanish people decided to invade them, they were not able to go further because they were not equipped to actually fight back. It's not just fighting back, of course, they were trained in military tactics and all that. But when the chief is captured, they feel that everything just falls apart. They are not able to go further with that. That is the meaning of it. So when you look at the cultures of Aztecs and Incas, they had very common features with the European culture. The society was hierarchical, and that is one common point with the Europeans. There was no private ownership of resources by a few people as in Europe. Everything was kind of distributed. There was no place for private ownership. Priests and shamans, you know what is the meaning of shaman? Something like a doctor, a person who heals and cures, but very different from the duty of a doctor. They were accorded as exalted status. They belonged to the first category. And large temples were built in which gold was used ritually. They used to use gold very much. And there was no great value associated with gold or silver. This was a marked contrast to contemporary European society. They made use of gold and silver too much. So that was a kind of contrast because Europeans did not give much importance. They do not even now give importance to these two. But still they had so much of things in common, that is regarding the hierarchy of the society, which was just like the Europeans.